There are moments in history when the past doesn't just fade, it vanishes by design. Picture a civilization so determined to disappear that its people meticulously scrubbed their own legacy from the world, leaving behind only a trail of indecipherable symbols, etched in stone or hidden in the margins of crumbling manuscripts. These aren't accidents of time. They're deliberate acts of erasure, and the stories they conceal are far more fascinating than anything we could invent. Today, we're stepping into the shadows to uncover 24 scripts created by cultures that didn't just vanish, they chose to be forgotten. Why would an entire society willingly erase itself from history? The answers are as varied as the scripts themselves. Some feared persecution, their words encrypted to protect sacred knowledge from falling into the wrong hands. Others may have sought to sever ties with a painful past, burying their language like a secret no one was meant to uncover. And then there are those whose motives remain utterly mysterious, their writings taunting us with riddles we still can't solve. These aren't just lost languages, they're deliberate puzzles, left behind like breadcrumbs leading to truths we're only beginning to grasp. What makes these scripts so compelling isn't just their obscurity, it's the sheer audacity of their creators. Imagine crafting an entire writing system not to communicate but to conceal, to ensure that even if your civilization crumbled, your secrets would remain yours alone. From the cryptic symbols of the Voinish manuscript to the untranslated codes of the Rongorongo tablets, these scripts challenge everything we think we know about memory, legacy, and the lengths people will go to control their own stories. So join me as we unravel the enigmas of societies that dared to silence themselves and discover why, centuries later, we're still desperate to hear what they tried so hard to leave unsaid. The desire to disappear doesn't come from nowhere. It's born from desperation, defiance, or sometimes pure necessity. Take the Cathars, a medieval religious group branded as heretics by the Catholic Church. Facing brutal persecution, they didn't just hide their beliefs, they encoded them. Their sacred texts were copied in secret, passed hand to hand like contraband. And when the pressure became too great, many chose to burn their own writings rather than let them be twisted into evidence against them. This wasn't carelessness, it was a calculated act of resistance, a way to deny their enemies the satisfaction of erasing them on their own terms. But self-erasure isn't always about fear. For the Bogomils, another marginalized sect, destroying their records was an act of spiritual purity. They believed the material world was corrupt, and that included the very words they'd written. By dismantling their own legacy, they sought to transcend it, to leave behind a silence so profound it would point others toward higher truths. Their disappearance wasn't an accident of history, it was the culmination of their philosophy. Then there are the more enigmatic cases, like the creators of the Phaistos Disc, a clay tablet stamped with mysterious symbols that no one has ever deciphered. Was it a forgotten language, a secret code, or something else entirely? The disc's makers left no key, no Rosetta Stone to help us unravel its meaning. It's as if they designed it to be forgotten, burying their message so deeply that even time couldn't dig it up. What unites these stories is the unsettling power of choice. Most lost civilizations are victims of conquest or decay, but these groups took control of their own vanishing. They remind us that history isn't just written by the winners. Sometimes it's unwritten by those who refuse to play the game at all. And that defiance, that deliberate silence, echoes louder than any monument. Of all the scripts designed to defy understanding, none taunts historians quite like the Voinish manuscript. This peculiar book, carbon dated to the early 15th century, is a gallery of the impossible hundreds of pages filled with looping, alien handwriting, accompanied by illustrations of plants that don't exist, celestial charts with constellations no one recognizes, and nude figures bathing in what looks like a system of interconnected green pools. It's as if the author distilled an entire world's knowledge into symbols meant to be seen but never comprehended. What makes the Voynich manuscript unique isn't just its undeciphered text, it's the unsettling precision of its design. Statistical analysis reveals patterns consistent with a real language, not random gibberish. The words follow grammatical rules, with characters appearing in frequencies that mirror natural speech. Yet every attempt to crack it, from Renaissance cryptographers to modern AI algorithms, has hit a wall. This wasn't just a code meant to be solved later. It was built to stay silent. So who went to such lengths to create a book no one could read? One theory points to medieval alchemists who often wrote in riddles to protect their secrets. The manuscript's strange botanical drawings could be coded recipes, its astrological diagrams a map to hidden knowledge. Others suggest it was crafted by a lone genius, an eccentric scholar, inventing an entire language just to document visions or dreams too strange for ordinary words. Then there's the darker possibility that the Voynich manuscript was never meant to communicate at all. Some historians argue it was an elaborate fraud, crafted to deceive wealthy patrons hungry for exotic mysteries. But if it's a hoax, why spend years painstakingly filling hundreds of pages with such intricate, consistent nonsense? The effort defies logic. Perhaps the most haunting idea is that the manuscript is a relic of a lost intellectual tradition, a lone survivor from a community that chose to vanish, taking their knowledge with them. Unlike the Cathars or Bogomils, they left no persecution to explain their silence. Only this book, whispering in a language we'll never understand, and that's the true power of the Voynich manuscript. It doesn't just resist translation, it challenges our very assumption that every script was meant to be read. While the Voynich manuscript taunts us with its otherworldly imagery, the Rongorongo script of Easter Island presents a different kind of mystery, one carved not in cryptic illustrations, but in stark, angular glyphs pressed into weathered wooden tablets. These symbols are the only known indigenous writing system to emerge across the vast expanse of Polynesia, a culture that thrived in isolation for centuries. Yet today, not a single person remains who can decipher their meaning. The last fluent readers vanished with the collapse of Easter Island society, taking the secrets of Rongorongo into silence. What makes these tablets so haunting isn't just their untranslated text, it's the eerie timing of their creation. Most evidence suggests Rongorongo appeared suddenly in the 18th century, just as European ships began arriving on the island's shores. Was this a desperate attempt to preserve knowledge in the face of impending disaster, or something even more startling, a spontaneous invention, sparked by contact with outsiders holding pens and paper? Some researchers argue the glyphs show signs of independent development, their symbols reflecting local plants, tools, and rituals unique to the island. Others point to similarities with South American scripts, hinting at possible ancient contact across the Pacific, but the deeper tragedy lies in what followed. As disease, slave raids, and deforestation ravaged Easter Island, the very people who carved these tablets watched their world disintegrate. Oral traditions suggest the last experts in Rongorongo were among the few survivors, their knowledge dying with them as the island's population dwindled to mere hundreds. Some tablets were burned as firewood, others were hidden away as if their creators couldn't bear to destroy them completely, yet couldn't risk leaving them exposed. Today, fewer than 30 authentic Rongorongo tablets survive, each one a puzzle wrapped in a paradox. If this script was meant to endure, why did its makers leave no key? If it was meant to vanish, why carve it so carefully into wood instead of sand? Perhaps the answer lies in the islanders' own understanding of loss. Unlike the Cathars or Bogomils, they didn't choose oblivion, it was forced upon them. In that light, Rongorongo might be something far more poignant than a code, a last act of defiance, a way to say we were here, even if no one would ever fully understand. The Indus Valley script is history's most enduring silent witness, a language carved into thousands of tiny stone seals, pottery fragments, and copper tablets, yet one that refuses to speak to us. For over 4,000 years, these symbols have sat undisturbed, their meanings locked away by a civilization that vanished without leaving behind a single bilingual inscription, no Rosetta Stone to bridge the gap between their world and ours. What's fascinating isn't just the script's undeciphered state, it's the precision with which it was crafted. Unlike random doodles or simple markings, these symbols appear in careful sequences, with characters repeating in patterns that suggest grammar, even poetry. If it's proto-writing, why does it look so deliberate? If it's a full language, why did no one preserve its key? Perhaps the answer lies in the civilization itself. The Indus Valley people built one of the ancient world's most advanced societies with grid-planned cities, sophisticated drainage systems, and trade networks stretching from Mesopotamia to the Himalayas. Yet they left no grand temples, no palaces, no obvious evidence of kings or conquerors. Their script, found mostly on small seals used for trade, might have been less about recording history and more about facilitating commerce, a bureaucratic tool that lost its purpose when their cities were abandoned. But here's the haunting twist: the script didn't fade gradually. It disappeared abruptly, as if the knowledge of how to read it was deliberately erased. Some researchers believe climate change or shifting rivers doomed the civilization, forcing its people to scatter and adapt. Others point to evidence of carefully dismantled buildings, as if the inhabitants were methodically wiping their own slate clean. Could the script's disappearance have been part of that vanishing act? Unlike the Cathars or the Bogomils, the Indus Valley people didn't seem to be fleeing persecution, but they may have been preserving something even more fragile than their language, their way of life. By not passing down their script, they ensured outsiders could never fully reconstruct their world. The irony is palpable. Today, we have AI algorithms analyzing the script's patterns, hoping to crack a code its own creators chose not to teach. Every undeciphered symbol is a reminder that some secrets aren't lost, they're kept. And that distinction makes the Indus Valley script one of history's most profound acts of quiet defiance. A language that didn't fade, but was folded away like a map returned to its drawer, waiting for a journey no one would ever take. Found in the ruins of the ancient Minoan palace of Phaistos on Crete, this palm-sized clay disc has baffled scholars for over a century. Pressed into its surface are 241 symbols, arranged in a tight spiral that coils inward like a serpent swallowing its own tail. Animals, plants, human figures, each imprint is crisp, deliberate, stamped into the clay with individual seals rather than carved by hand. It's a masterpiece of Bronze Age craftsmanship, yet its very perfection deepens the mystery. Why create such an intricate object if its message was never meant to be understood? The Phaistos Disc stands alone in the archaeological record. No other artifact from Minoan Crete bears these symbols, and no later culture used them. Even more puzzling is the disc's physical context. It was discovered in a basement room, nestled among ordinary pottery, as if someone had casually tucked it away. There's no grand tomb, no temple altar, nothing to suggest it held ceremonial importance. This wasn't a display piece. It was something private, perhaps even urgent. Some researchers argue the disc symbols represent an early form of writing, a precursor to Linear A, the still undeciphered script of the Minoans. The repeating patterns hint at possible syllables or words, but without a bilingual inscription or additional examples, every decoding attempt collapses into guesswork. Others propose it's not language at all, that the symbols are a game board, an ancient musical notation, or even an early form of astronomical calendar. But the most compelling theory is also the simplest. The Phaistos Disc was designed to be indecipherable. Unlike the Voynich manuscript or Rongorongo tablets, which were clearly meant to be read by someone, the disc's symbols might have served a purpose beyond communication. Perhaps they were ritual objects, each stamp a sacred gesture meant to consecrate the clay rather than convey information. Or maybe they were a cipher known only to a select few, a secret so potent it had to be physically sealed away when its keepers vanished. What's chilling is how thoroughly the knowledge of this script was erased. The Minoans left behind frescoes, pottery, even plumbing systems, but not a single clue about the disc's meaning. It's as if the last person who understood it took one look at the crumbling palace walls and chose silence, and that's what makes the Phaistos Disc more than just an unsolved puzzle. It's a relic of a vanishing act so complete, we're left wondering if the mystery itself was the point all along. The Proto-Elamite script is history's shortest-lived writing experiment, a fleeting attempt to capture language in symbols, used for barely a century before vanishing into obscurity. Unlike the enduring cuneiform of Mesopotamia or the hieroglyphs of Egypt, this system emerged in ancient Iran around 3100 BCE, only to collapse under its own complexity. What remains are hundreds of clay tablets, mostly dry administrative records, lists of grain, livestock, and goods scrawled in symbols that look like cuneiform's rebellious cousin. But here's the twist: Proto-Elamite wasn't just abandoned. It feels almost rejected, as if its creators took one look at their own invention and walked away. The script's fatal flaw might have been its ambition. While cuneiform started simple, with pictographs for tangible objects like barley or sheep, Proto-Elamite leapt straight into abstraction. Its symbols represent numbers, commodities, and even phonetic sounds, but without the gradual evolution that made other systems usable. Imagine inventing calculus before mastering basic arithmetic. That's the level of cognitive leap its scribes faced. Some tablets show signs of frustration, symbols crammed into margins, scratched out errors, even tablets repurposed as scratch paper. This wasn't a writing system refined over generations. It was a high-stakes experiment that burned too bright, too fast. Why cling to a script that clearly wasn't working? One theory points to politics. The Proto-Elamite tablets cluster around Susa, a city straddling Mesopotamia and the Iranian plateau. Its rulers might have seen writing as a tool to rival their neighbors, rushing to adopt symbols without the cultural infrastructure to sustain them. When the system failed, they didn't bother to fix it. They simply switched to Akkadian cuneiform, a proven technology. The abandoned tablets weren't sacred texts or epic poetry. They were bureaucratic dead ends left behind like outdated software. But there's a darker possibility: that Proto-Elamite's disappearance wasn't an accident, but a deliberate act of cultural amnesia. Unlike the Rosetta Stone, which proudly displayed its script alongside Greek, Proto-Elamite left no bilingual key. Its creators could have passed down its secrets instead. They buried them. Perhaps the script was too tightly bound to a failed regime, or too entangled with rituals best forgotten. Whatever the reason, its abrupt end feels less like a collapse and more like a choice, our society pressing delete on its own experiment, leaving behind clay fragments that whisper, "We tried and we moved on." What makes Proto-Elamite so haunting isn't just its failure, but the quiet audacity of that failure. most lost scripts fade gradually, eroded by time or conquest. This one feels like it was dismantled, its pieces scattered like breadcrumbs no one was meant to follow. In that way, it's the perfect counterpoint to scripts like the Voynich manuscript or Rongorongo. They dared to be mysterious. Proto-Elamite dared to be forgotten, and in doing so, it became something even rarer, a language that didn't just disappear but politely showed itself out. The Rohonc Codex doesn't just defy translation, it defies logic. Discovered in the early 19th century in a Hungarian nobleman's library, this 400-page manuscript is a carnival of contradictions. Its 448 pages are filled with dense, looping symbols unlike any known script, interspersed with crude illustrations that swing wildly from Christian crucifixions to Islamic crescent moons and pagan sun worship. It's as if someone took a dozen belief systems, shredded them together, and bound the fragments into a book no one was meant to understand. What makes the Codex so unsettling isn't just its undeciphered text, it's the way it flaunts its own impossibility. Carbon dating places its vellum pages between the 1500s and 1600s, but the script itself has no clear ancestors or descendants. Some symbols resemble runes, others look like distorted Hebrew, and a few seem plucked from pure imagination. Even stranger, the text reads alternately left to right to left, and sometimes in zigzagging boustrophedon patterns, as if the writer was deliberately toying with readability. This isn't just a cipher, it's a labyrinth with no exit. Theories about its origins range from plausible to fantastical. Some scholars argue it's a medieval religious text, crafted by a secretive sect that blended Christianity with older traditions. The mix of symbols could have been a way to hide heterodox beliefs from inquisitors, a spiritual mosaic where only initiates knew how to piece together the true message. Others suggest it's the work of a Renaissance con artist, cobbling together exotic-looking scripts to sell a fake antiquity to some gullible collector. But forgers usually mimic known styles. Why invent an entirely new one? Then there's the most chilling possibility that the Codex is a relic of a culture that intentionally severed its own roots. Hungary in the 1600s was a battleground of empires where Ottoman, Habsburg, and local forces clashed relentlessly. In such chaos, a community might have encrypted their traditions to survive, creating a script so personal it couldn't be co-opted. The pagan symbols alongside Christian and Islamic imagery could signal not confusion but defiance, a refusal to let outsiders define their identity. Today, the Rohonc Codex sits in the Hungarian Academy of Sciences, its secrets intact. Modern linguists have tried everything from frequency analysis to eye pattern recognition, but the script resists all cracking. Maybe that's the point. Unlike the Voinish manuscript's tantalizing illustrations or the Rongorongo tablet's stark glyphs, the Codex feels like a mirror. Stare too long, and you start to wonder if its real message isn't in the symbols at all, but in the act of writing something meant to endure, yet never be understood. A language not of communication, but of pure, unbroken silence. Buried beneath the waters of a Neolithic lakeshore in northern Greece, the Despilio tablet lay silent for over 7,000 years. When archaeologists pulled this wooden slab from the mud in 1993, they uncovered something extraordinary, a grid of strange, angular symbols carved with deliberate precision. Carbon dating places its creation around 5200 BCE, making it older than Mesopotamian cuneiform by 2 millennia. If these markings are writing, they predate every known European script by thousands of years. But that's the haunting question. What makes the Despilio tablet so tantalizing isn't just its age, it's the eerie specificity of its symbols. Unlike random scratches or decorative patterns, the markings repeat in sequences that suggest intention. Some resemble rudimentary tally marks, while others look like abstract representations of tools or plants. To the untrained eye, they could pass as primitive bookkeeping. But to linguists, they hint at something far more radical, a writing system that flickered to life in Neolithic Europe, only to vanish without a trace. Why would such a groundbreaking invention disappear? One theory points to the tablet's fragile medium. Unlike clay or stone, wood rots, which means Despilio might be the sole survivor of a larger tradition lost to time. Perhaps other tablets once existed, their messages disintegrating with the villages that crafted them. Another possibility is even more intriguing, that the symbols weren't meant for widespread use at all. Found near the remains of a stilt house settlement, the tablet might have served a ritual purpose, a sacred ledger for shamans or elders, its meaning guarded so closely that it died with its keepers. Then there's the darker interpretation. The Despilio symbols show no clear evolution into later scripts, no descendant languages picking up their torch. This wasn't a system that faded, it was abandoned, as if its creators collectively decided it wasn't worth preserving. Maybe the cognitive leap to full writing proved too vast, or the society that birthed it collapsed before the idea could spread. Whatever the case, the tablet stands as a ghostly what-if, a glimpse of a timeline where Europe's literary tradition began not with Phoenician traders, but with Neolithic farmers etching secrets into wood. Today, the Despilio tablet sits in a museum in Greece, its symbols still undeciphered. Unlike the Voinish manuscript or Rongorongo, there's no fevered race to crack its code. Perhaps that's fitting. Some scripts vanish because they're meant to be mysteries, others because they were never meant to be remembered at all. And the Despilio tablet, it lingers in the space between a whisper from a world that left no instructions on how to listen. The Vinca symbols don't look like much at first glance, just a series of scratches and dashes etched into broken pottery fragments scattered across the Balkans. But these humble marks, dating back to 6000 BCE, hold a secret that stirred debate for decades. Were Europe's Neolithic farmers dabbling in writing millennia before the Sumerians? Unlike the grand tablets of Mesopotamia or the ornate glyphs of Egypt, the Vinca symbols are disarmingly simple. Zigzags, crosses, branching lines, they could be dismissed as decorative flourishes or potter's signatures. Yet their consistency is haunting. The same symbols appear on artifacts hundreds of miles apart, recurring in combinations that feel less like random doodles and more like a silent language. What's compelling isn't just their age, it's their isolation. The Vinca culture left behind no palaces, no elaborate tombs, just these cryptic markings alongside their clay bowls and figurines. If this was a writing system, it wasn't used for kings or conquests. It might have been something far more intimate, a way to label sacred objects, record harvests, or even send messages between villages without speaking aloud. Some researchers argue the symbols resemble later Bronze Age scripts, suggesting a thread of continuity snapped by time. Others counter that they're proto-writing, a bridge between simple tallies and true language, frozen mid-evolution. But here's the twist. The Vinca symbols show no signs of ever developing into a full script. Unlike cuneiform, which evolved from pictographs to abstract signs, these marks stayed stubbornly static for over 1,000 years. That's the telltale clue. They might not have been meant for communication at all. Imagine a family recipe passed down in shorthand, or a craftsman's private system for tracking kiln temperatures. The symbols could have been a closed loop, meaningful only to the few who needed them. When the Vinca culture faded, their language didn't vanish. It simply completed its purpose, leaving behind fragments that whisper of a world where writing wasn't about legacy, but utility. The real mystery isn't whether we'll ever decipher the Vinca symbols. It's why we're so desperate to call them writing in the first place. Maybe their power lies in what they refuse to be a reminder that not all codes are meant to be cracked and not all silence is accidental. Sometimes the past isn't hiding from us, it's just speaking in a voice we were never meant to hear. The Inca built an empire without wheels, without iron, and most astonishingly, without writing. At least, that's what the Spanish conquistadors believed when they encountered the Quipu, a cascade of knotted cords dangling from administrative centers like mathematical jellyfish. To European eyes, these twisted strings were primitive tally systems unworthy of preservation, so they burned them by the thousands, dismissing them as pagan curiosities. But what if the Quipu wasn't just a calculator? What if those knots held stories, laws, even poetry, a language in fiber designed to be read by touch, not sight? At first glance, quipus looked deceptively simple. Cotton or wool cords hang from a central strand with knots tied at precise intervals. Spanish chroniclers noted their use for accounting tracking llama herds, grain stores, population counts. The knots' positions and types represented numbers in a base 10 system, with clusters acting like spreadsheet rows, but recent discoveries hint at something far more complex. Some quipus contain knots in patterns that don't correspond to numerical data. Others have chords dyed in vivid colors, arranged in sequences that mirror grammatical structures. Could these be syllables, names, entire narratives? The key might lie in the Quipu's resilience. After the Spanish conquest, when indigenous scribes were forbidden to keep written records, quipus flourished in secret. Spanish documents from the 1560s complain of natives reading knotted chords in hidden ceremonies, passing down histories the invaders couldn't confiscate. This wasn't just persistence, it was subterfuge. By encoding information in a medium Europeans deemed worthless, the Inca and their descendants preserved knowledge right under colonial noses. Modern researchers are finally catching up. Linguists studying surviving quipus have identified recurring knot clusters that may represent place names or familial lineages. In the Andes, elderly Quechua speakers recall grandparents decoding chords with tactile precision, their fingers tracing meaning as effortlessly as eyes scan a page. The most tantalizing clue, a rare colonial-era manuscript pairing a Quipu with a Spanish translation, suggesting some knots did encode language, not just quantities. Yet the full truth remains knotted in mystery. Of the estimated thousands of quipus that once existed, fewer than 1,000 survive, many cut or faded. Without a Rosetta Stone linking knots to spoken words, reconstruction is painstaking, but perhaps that's the point. The Quipu's genius was its ambiguity, a system flexible enough to hold numbers for bureaucrats, stories for elders, and secrets for rebels. In a world where paper burned and metal melted, threads endured, and in their twists and loops they whispered a truth the Spanish never grasped, that writing isn't just about ink. It's about memory tied tightly enough to outlast even fire. The Etruscans wielded power like a whispered secret. Their influence stretched across Italy long before Rome claimed its first brick. Yet today, their language clings to existence in broken fragments, a ghost lingering in the alphabet it helped create. This was no primitive scribble. Adopting and adapting the Greek script around 700 BCE, the Etruscans left behind nearly 13,000 inscriptions on tombs, mirrors, even the linings of ceremonial bowls, each character crisp, deliberate. But here's the paradox. Theirs is the most documented extinct language of the ancient Mediterranean, yet we understand barely a fraction of its meaning. How does a civilization so meticulous in record-keeping ensure its words become a locked vault? Perhaps the answer lies in what the Etruscans chose not to write. Unlike the Romans, who plastered their laws and triumphs on every available surface, Etruscan texts focus overwhelmingly on rituals, funerary rites, divination manuals, the proper way to interpret lightning strikes or bird flights. These weren't just religious notes, they were blueprints for wielding invisible forces. Consider the Zagreb mummy wrappings, a linen scroll nearly 13 feet long, painstakingly inscribed with sacred texts before being cut into strips to bandage an Egyptian corpse. The message survived, but its context didn't. Without living initiates to explain its nuances, the words became elegant gibberish. Then there's the matter of their alphabet's afterlife. The Etruscans didn't just borrow Greek letters, they refined them, stripping away redundant sounds to create a streamlined system so efficient that Rome's earliest scribes copied it nearly wholesale. Our modern A, B, and C owe their shapes to Etruscan hands, yet the language itself evaporated, not through conquest or coercion, but through something far subtler: cultural surrender. As Rome ascended, Etruscan elites began raising their children in Latin, treating their mother tongue as a liturgical relic useful for speaking to the gods, perhaps, but not for securing political futures. But was this really a defeat? The Piacenza liver, a bronze model of a sheep's liver covered in Etruscan inscriptions, offers a clue. Used to teach divination, its surface is divided into 40 sections, each labeled with the name of a deity governing that portion of the sky. To read it was to map the will of the cosmos. That kind of knowledge wasn't just information, it was power, the sort that loses potency when shared too freely. By letting their language fade, the Etruscans may have performed their final act of divination, ensuring that some mysteries remain, even in plain sight. After all, the greatest magic tricks aren't those hidden in darkness, but those performed in full view, leaving audiences convinced they've seen everything when really, they've glimpsed nothing at all. The Zapotec script doesn't whisper, it roars from the stones of Monte Alban, its jagged glyphs cutting into the sides of temples and stelae like a challenge to time itself. Carved between 500 and 200 BCE, these symbols aren't just Mesoamerica's first writing, they're a paradox. At their peak, they chronicled conquests, rituals, and the names of kings, yet today, fewer than a dozen fragmented texts survive. The rest vanished as if the Zapotecs themselves brushed their own history into the wind. What makes these glyphs so haunting isn't just their scarcity, it's their defiance of context. Unlike Maya script, which flourished into intricate codices, Zapotec writing clings to stone, its messages locked in brief, enigmatic phrases. Take the Danzante slabs, over 300 carved figures, their contorted bodies accompanied by glyphs so terse they feel like riddles. Some scholars argue these depict sacrificed war captives, their names and origins reduced to a handful of symbols. Others see a darker possibility, that the glyphs weren't meant to inform but to conceal, encoding knowledge meant only for priestly elites. The key to the mystery might lie in how the Zapotecs viewed writing itself. For the Maya, glyphs were a living thread connecting earth to the divine. But Zapotec inscriptions cluster overwhelmingly in two places: tombs and monuments. There are no tax records, no merchant ledgers, just declarations of power and rituals for the dead. This wasn't a script for daily life. It was a sacred fire, burning only where the rulers and the gods could see. And then there's the eerie silence that followed. By the time the Maya script reached its golden age, Zapotec writing had already faded, its last glyphs growing simpler, almost hesitant. No invasion stamped it out. No decree banned it. Instead, it seems the Zapotecs simply stopped. Perhaps the cost of maintaining such an elite system grew too high, or maybe the act of writing became too sacred to risk spreading. Either way, the glyphs didn't just disappear, they retreated like embers banked for a fire that would never be lit again. Today, the surviving texts stare back at us mute. Modern linguists can parse a handful of calendar dates and royal names, but the deeper meanings slip away like smoke. Maybe that's the point. The Zapotec script wasn't designed for outsiders, or even for posterity. It was a conversation between a people and their gods, written not to endure but to mean something, if only for a moment, and in that it succeeded perfectly. The stones remember, they just refuse to tell. The Byblos syllabary doesn't just resist translation, it mocks the very attempt. Unearthed in the ruins of ancient Lebanon's port city, these 100+ symbols stare back at scholars with the smug confidence of a locked door whose key was thrown into the Mediterranean millennia ago. At first glance, the characters seem familiar curves and strokes that echo Egyptian hieroglyphs, as if the scribes of Byblos borrowed their neighbor's pen but not their dictionary. Yet every effort to match these symbols to known languages hits a wall. This isn't a puzzle missing pieces. It's a puzzle designed to stay that way. What makes the syllabary so frustrating isn't just its brevity, only 10 inscriptions survive, but their tantalizing context. These weren't scrawled on pottery shards or tossed into middens. They appear on royal tablets and ceremonial spatulas, artifacts reserved for the elite. One bronze dagger bears the script alongside gold inlay, a weapon too precious for battle. This was writing as theater, a performance of power meant to dazzle, not inform. The symbols cluster in tight, elegant lines, their spacing precise, their forms polished. Whoever carved them wasn't jotting down grocery lists, they were crafting a spectacle, one where exclusivity was the whole point. Theories about the script's purpose spiral from plausible to poetic. Some linguists argue it was a diplomatic cipher, a way for Byblos rulers to communicate with foreign allies without risking leaks to their own people. Others see it as sacred code, akin to the Vatican's Latin in the Middle Ages, a language of ritual that separated priests from populace. But the most intriguing clue lies in Byblos itself. The city was a crossroads, a hub where Egyptian papyrus met Mesopotamian clay. In such a place, a unique script could be more than writing. It could be a brand, a way to assert cultural independence between two towering empires. And then there's the silence. Unlike cuneiform or hieroglyphs, the syllabary left no descendants, no scribble schools to preserve its secrets. When Byblos' influence waned, the script didn't evolve, it evaporated, as if its keepers decided some doors should stay closed. Modern attempts to crack it using eye pattern recognition have yielded only dead ends. The symbols refuse to map to any Semitic, Egyptian, or Indo-European language. Maybe that's the lesson. Some scripts weren't meant to be read. They were meant to impress, to intimidate, to remind us that the past doesn't owe us understanding. The Byblos syllabary didn't fail to survive. It succeeded at disappearing. The Isthmian script sits at the crossroads of Mesoamerican history like a riddle carved in stone, a fleeting bridge between the Olmec, the so-called mother culture of the region, and the Maya, whose glyphs would later dominate the classical age. Found on a mere handful of artifacts scattered across Mexico's Isthmus of Tehuantepec, these symbols pulse with untold significance. Some inscriptions appear on polished jade celts, their surfaces gleaming with the same green intensity as Olmec ceremonial axes. Others adorn stelae, their angular glyphs echoing the early Maya's emerging flair for monumentality. But here's what stops historians cold. The script flourished for just a few centuries before vanishing, leaving no Rosetta Stone, no bilingual key, just fragments of a conversation we can't overhear. What makes Isthmian so tantalizing isn't just its scarcity, it's the way it defies categorization. The symbols share DNA with Olmec iconography, those enigmatic jaguar gods and downturned mouths familiar from colossal stone heads. Yet their arrangement feels distinctly Maya-like, grouped into cartouches that hint at phonetic complexity. Was this a transitional script, a missing link in the evolution of Mesoamerican writing? Or something far more ephemeral, a diplomatic lingua franca, designed to smooth trade between rival kingdoms? The La Mogera Stela offers clues. This 6-foot-tall monolith depicts a ruler in elaborate regalia, his triumphs narrated in Isthmian glyphs alongside 2 long count calendar dates. The dates we can read, the rest a locked vault. Then there's the darker possibility that Isthmian's disappearance wasn't an accident but sabotage. The script's decline coincides with the collapse of Olmec influence and the rise of Maya city-states. In that power vacuum, writing systems weren't just tools, they were political statements. Rulers may have purged Isthmian precisely because it belonged to no one empire, its neutrality making it dangerous. Imagine a world where alphabets could be outlawed not for what they said, but for whose they were. Today, only about 30 Isthmian inscriptions survive, their messages stubbornly silent. Modern attempts to decipher them lean on pattern recognition, hunting for repeated glyphs that might represent titles or place names. But without a bilingual text progress crawls, perhaps that's fitting. Some scripts aren't meant to be bridges between worlds, they're meant to be mirrors, reflecting back our own limitations. The Isthmian glyphs don't just guard their secrets, they remind us that history isn't a puzzle to solve, but a conversation we've walked in on millennia too late. Hidden in the mist-shrouded mountains of southern China, the Tujia script is a whisper from a people who refuse to be silenced. Unlike the bold strokes of Chinese calligraphy or the intricate carvings of oracle bones, these symbols slink between worlds, part written language, part sacred cipher. Used exclusively by Tujia shamans, the script wasn't just a tool for communication. It was a shield crafted to protect an entire culture from assimilation under centuries of Han Chinese rule. At first glance, the glyphs seem to mimic Chinese characters, familiar curves and lines that might fool a passing official, but look closer and the illusion fractures. Some symbols twist into abstract spirals like knots in a shaman's rope. Others resemble half-erased pictographs, as if the scribes paused mid-stroke and deliberately smudged the meaning. This wasn't carelessness, it was camouflage, a way to hide ancestral knowledge in plain sight. Imagine writing a diary in your enemy's alphabet, then scrambling every third word so only your kin could read it. That's the Tujia script's genius, a language that dared its oppressors to misunderstand it. The shamans who guarded this script weren't merely record keepers. They were living libraries, memorizing rituals, medicinal lore, and migration histories too dangerous to commit to paper. When they did write, it was often on perishable materials, bamboo slips or cloth, ensuring that if their texts were seized, time would do the erasing for them. Only a handful of stone inscriptions survive, their glyphs worn smooth by weather and secrecy. Even today, fewer than 24 Tujia elders can fully decipher the script, their knowledge passed down in whispers, not textbooks. What's most striking isn't the script's rarity, it's its resilience. During the Qing dynasty's brutal campaigns to sinicize minority groups, the Tujia could have abandoned their writing entirely. Instead, they hollowed it out. Publicly, they adopted Chinese characters for official business. Privately, they kept their glyphs alive in rituals, stitching them into funeral shrouds or carving them onto talismans meant to be burned. The script became a ghost, present only where it couldn't be confiscated in smoke, in song, in the muscle memory of aging hands tracing symbols in the air. Modern linguists face a paradox. The Tujia script isn't fully extinct, but it's not fully alive either. Unlike the Voinish manuscript's tantalizing ambiguity or the Rongorongo tablet's isolation, this script's keepers still walk among us, elderly shamans who could unlock its secrets if they chose. Yet many refuse, not out of spite but out of fidelity to an ancient bargain. Some words lose their power when spoken aloud. The Tujia script's greatest trick wasn't surviving history. It was making sure that even when remembered, it would never truly be known. The Nsibidi script doesn't whisper, it dances, flowing across the skin of calabashes, etched into the walls of sacred groves, or traced in the air by initiates' fingertips. These symbols were West Africa's silent revolution. Born among the Ogham people and adopted by the Ekp secret society, Nsibidi wasn't just writing. It was a language of power capable of conveying court verdicts, romantic poetry, or warnings of impending war with a single, elegant glyph. A coiled serpent might signal danger, while interlocking circles could bind two lovers in a pact stronger than any spoken vow. But what made Nsibidi truly extraordinary wasn't its versatility, it was its defiance. When British colonial forces swept through what's now Nigeria and Cameroon in the late 19th century, they recognized Nsibidi's threat immediately. Unlike Arabic or Latin scripts which Europeans could confiscate or translate, these symbols belonged to a closed world. Ekp members, known as leopards for their stealth and ferocity, guarded the script's meanings with rituals so strict that even today, full comprehension remains locked behind layers of initiation. Colonial administrators banned public displays of Nsibidi, burning manuscripts and arresting those caught teaching it. But here's what they failed to grasp. You can't erase a language that lives in gesture, in body paint, in the very architecture of a community's memory. The script's survival reads like a masterclass in cultural resistance. Ekp scribes began embedding Nsibidi into everyday objects. A market woman's basket weave might conceal a glyph for fair trade, while a blacksmith's hammer could bear the symbol for strength in unity. To outsiders, these marks were decoration. To initiates, they were a living newspaper. Even more ingeniously, the society adapted Nsibidi into Yukara cloth, a striking indigo-dyed fabric embroidered with white symbols. Worn during ceremonies, these textiles turned the body itself into a walking manifesto, their messages legible only to those who'd earned the right to read them. What's haunting isn't just Nsibidi's resilience, it's the cost of that survival. With each generation pressured to prioritize English or French, fluency dwindled. Modern linguists estimate only a few hundred elders retain full knowledge, most refusing to share it beyond the Ekp inner circle, yet echoes persist. In contemporary Nigerian art, Nsibidi glyphs resurface as motifs, their original meanings blurred but their presence undeniable, a defiant act of memory or a quiet surrender to time. Perhaps both, the script's greatest power was never in permanence, but in its ability to shape-shift, to be seen but not seized, remembered but not owned. Like the Ekp leopards that inspired its keepers, Nsibidi moves through history on silent pause, leaving marks that say everything and nothing at all. The Goths carried their runes like hidden blades, each angular stroke a silent witness to a culture caught between empires. Unlike the Norse, who carved their sagas into stone for all to see, the Goths left behind only fragments, a handful of inscriptions on spearheads, amulets, and the rare runestone. This scarcity feels deliberate. By the time they sacked Rome in 410, these nomadic warriors had already perfected the art of cultural camouflage, their writing system flickering in and out of history like a signal fire in a storm. What makes the Gothic runes so tantalizing isn't just their rarity, it's their duality. Adapted from the Elder Futhark alphabet, the script was streamlined for practicality, its 24 symbols pared down to fit the rhythms of a spoken language that thrived in war camps and mountain passes. The famous Codex Argentius, a 6th century Bible translation, shows Gothic script at its most refined, yet even this sacred text survives in just a single, dazzling silver-inked manuscript. Where are the laws, the epics, the daily records? Either the Goths wrote sparingly or someone made sure their words wouldn't endure. The clues point to both. When the Huns drove the Goths westward, writing became a liability. A captured rune-carved tablet could betray troop movements. A confiscated ledger might expose allied tribes. Oral traditions were safer, flexible, deniable, carried in the memories of scalds who could alter details as needed. But there's a deeper layer. The Goths' conversion to Arian Christianity, a heresy despised by Rome, turned their texts into targets. Church synods ordered Arian writings burned, and Gothic bishops, like the fierce Wulfila, became as skilled at smuggling scriptures as they were at preaching them. Yet the runes' disappearance might also reflect a cultural choice. Unlike the Romans, who built archives to outlast empires, the Goths revered the spoken word's fleeting power. Their greatest king, Theodoric the Great, ruled Italy without leaving a single written decree. His authority flowed through oaths and public speeches, not parchment. In that light, the sparse runic relics aren't accidents of history. They're footprints in snow, meant to fade under the sun of a new age. Today, the Gothic language survives mostly in Wulfila's Bible translations, its runes fossilized in ecclesiastical Latin script. But listen closely to the echoes. When modern linguists reconstruct Gothic speech from those parchment pages, they're not just reviving a dead language, they're hearing the whispers of a people who mastered the art of vanishing in plain sight. The runes were never meant to be their voice. They were the pause between breaths. The Bamum script didn't emerge from centuries of slow evolution. It burst into existence through the sheer will of a single visionary king. In 1896, as European powers carved up Africa, King Enjoya of Cameroon sat in his palace in Foumban, sketching symbols in the dirt. Within a decade, those sketches would become a full writing system, a script designed not just to record language, but to forge a nation. This wasn't mere imitation. Enjoya studied Arabic and Latin alphabets, then deliberately crafted something entirely his own, a fluid, geometric script that could capture the nuances of the Bamum language with elegant precision. His ambition to unify his fractious kingdom under a shared written identity, one that would outlast oral traditions and rival the colonizers' own tools of power. But scripts born in the shadow of empire rarely get happy endings. The French, who seized control of Cameroon after World War I, saw Enjoya's creation as a threat. Here was a king who didn't just resist, he innovated, giving his people a means to document laws, histories, and grievances outside colonial oversight. By 1931, the script was banned, its manuscripts confiscated or burned. Enjoya himself was exiled, his palace reduced to rubble. Yet the story doesn't end there. In a twist worthy of legend, a handful of scribes smuggled out key texts, preserving the script in secret like embers banked against the wind. Today, the Bamum script exists in a fragile limbo. Of the original 6,000 characters Enjoya designed, later refined to 70, fewer than a dozen elders retain full fluency. They're the last living bridges to a writing system that was meant to empower, not vanish. What makes their guardianship so poignant isn't just the knowledge they protect, it's the script's inherent adaptability. Unlike static ancient scripts, Bamum evolved in real time, with Enjoya issuing updates like a modern software developer. Early versions resemble pictographs, while later iterations grow sleek and abstract, a visual metaphor for a culture in rapid transformation. The tragedy isn't that Bamum failed. It's that it almost worked. Before the French crackdown, schools taught it, courts used it, and poets composed in it. For a fleeting moment, a script born from one man's imagination became the lifeblood of a nation. Now, as linguists race to document the last fluent speakers, the script's legacy hangs by a thread. But perhaps that's the paradox of all suppressed writing systems. They remind us that words can be outlawed, but not unimagined. The Bamum script's true power wasn't in surviving. It was in being dreamed at all. The Adinkra symbols don't just decorate, they speak. Woven into the fabric of Ghana's Ashanti culture, these elegant glyphs transform cloth into a canvas of wisdom, each shape a silent sermon on life, justice, or the cosmos. Unlike traditional scripts that record words, Adinkra captures ideas in their purest form. A spiral for perseverance, a crossed sword and staff for unity in diversity, a stylized heart for patience and tolerance. This isn't just art, it's visual philosophy designed to be worn, touched, and lived. What makes Adinkra remarkable isn't its antiquity, it's its intentional ambiguity. While Egyptian hieroglyphs or cuneiform sought precision, these symbols thrive on openness. Take Sankofa, the iconic bird twisting its neck to pluck a seed from its back. To one wearer, it might mean learning from the past. To another, it could signal the courage to reclaim what was lost. The power lies in the gap between symbol and interpretation, a space where oral tradition fills the blanks. This was writing without fixity, knowledge that refused to be pinned down. The origins of Adinkra whisper of resistance. Oral histories trace the symbols to the early 19th century, when the Ashanti king Osei Bonsu commissioned them after defeating the rival Jiaman people. According to legend, Jiaman's ruler had dared to replicate the Ashanti's sacred golden stool, a crime punishable by death. Among the spoils of war were robes embroidered with cryptic designs, which Bonsu's artisans adapted and expanded. In this light, Adinkra became more than decoration. It was a cultural counterstrike, a way to absorb a defeated foe's artistry while imprinting it with new meaning. Yet Adinkra's genius was its adaptability. Unlike rigid scripts tied to specific sounds, these symbols could migrate across media stamped on funeral cloths to honor the dead, carved into stools for rulers, or etched onto pottery for daily inspiration. Their meanings shifted with context. The same symbol on a warrior's tunic might signify bravery, while on a mother's headscarf, it could represent protective love. This fluidity made them impervious to colonial erasure. While European missionaries burned African manuscripts, they dismissed Adinkra as mere ornament, unaware they were witnessing a subversive act of memory. Today, the symbols endure as Ghana's silent orators. Modern designers weave them into logos, activists repurpose them for social justice movements, and scholars debate whether they qualify as a true writing system. But perhaps that debate misses the point. Adinkra wasn't meant to compete with alphabets. It was a rebellion against the very idea that knowledge must be frozen in text. In a world obsessed with recording every word, these symbols remind us that some truths are too vibrant to be caged in ink. They don't just represent wisdom, they invite us to wear it, to dance with it, to let it breathe. The Cherokee syllabary didn't just emerge, it defied. In the early 1800s, when the Cherokee Nation faced relentless pressure to assimilate, a man named Sequoyah, a silversmith with no formal education, performed an act of linguistic alchemy. Alone in his workshop, he distilled the spoken Cherokee language into 86 elegant symbols, each representing a syllable. This wasn't just innovation, it was rebellion. Within months of its completion in 1821, thousands of Cherokee people became literate in their own tongue, a feat so astonishing that skeptical American officials initially accused Sequoyah of witchcraft. But the syllabary's real magic wasn't in its speed, it was in its power. Suddenly, the Cherokee Nation could print their own laws, record their history, and most remarkably, publish the Cherokee Phoenix, the first Native American newspaper. Its pages, printed in both Cherokee and English, became a battleground of ideas, defending tribal sovereignty against relentless encroachment. Here was a script that didn't just communicate, it armored a culture under siege. The Syllabary's very existence mocked the myth of indigenous backwardness, proving that intellectual brilliance thrived outside European frameworks. Then came the Trail of Tears. In 1838, the U.S. government forcibly removed the Cherokee from their ancestral lands, displacing thousands and shattering communities. The printing presses fell silent, and the Phoenix's voice was abruptly extinguished. Yet the Syllabary refused to die. Uprooted Cherokee speakers carried it westward like hidden seeds, teaching it to children in makeshift schools and scratching symbols into tree bark when paper was scarce. What began as a tool of resistance became an act of preservation, a way to hold onto identity even as the world tried to erase it. The Syllabary's survival is a lesson in resilience. Unlike scripts that faded with their civilizations, Cherokee writing adapted. Today, it thrives on street signs in Oklahoma, in digital fonts on smartphones, and in immersion schools where a new generation learns to shape its curves. But the true testament isn't just in its revival, it's in its unbroken lineage. Sequoia's symbols still connect modern Cherokee speakers to their ancestors, a living thread stretching back to that moment when one man stared down oblivion and replied with ink and fire. The Syllabary wasn't just born from resistance, it became resistance, proving that some scripts can't be silenced even when the world tries to tear them out by the roots. The Aramaic incantation bowls weren't just artifacts, they were traps. Crafted in Mesopotamia between the 5th and 8th centuries, these unassuming clay vessels bear spiraling inscriptions in Aramaic, the lingua franca of the ancient Near East. But these weren't mundane records or shopping lists. Scrawled in concentric circles along the bowl's interiors were spells specific, urgent, and often terrifying. Demons of disease, curses from jealous neighbors, spectral hitchhikers clinging to the living, all named, confronted, and ultimately imprisoned within the bowl's curved walls. The magic wasn't in the writing alone, it was in the act of breaking it. What makes these bowls so unsettling isn't just their purpose, it's their impermanence. Once inscribed, they were buried upside down beneath homes or thresholds, a ritual meant to physically entomb the malevolent forces they captured. Imagine writing a letter to your worst fear, then sealing it in a vault and throwing away the key. That's the paradox of these texts. They were designed to endure just long enough to work, then vanish into the earth. Unlike sacred scrolls or royal decrees, their power depended on their destruction. The spells themselves read like cosmic legal documents, blending Aramaic with snippets of Babylonian and Persian. One bowl might command a demon to cease tormenting the daughter of Rachel, while another lists the names of 42 angels as witnesses to the binding. The language is precise, almost bureaucratic, as if the scribes were drafting contracts with the supernatural. But here's the twist: many bowls were commissioned by ordinary people, not priests or kings. Surviving examples mention tailors, bakers, even children, their fears etched in hurried strokes. This wasn't elite esoterica. It was democracy in the darkest sense, a chance for anyone with a lump of clay and a scribe's fee to fight back against the unseen. Yet the bowl's true genius lies in their fragility. Fired at low temperatures, they crumble easily, ensuring that even if unearthed, their spells would already be spent. Some researchers argue they're the ultimate self-destructing texts, predecessors to modern encryption that erases itself after reading. Others see a darker metaphor, that writing, once released into the world, can't be taken back. By burying their words, the bowl makers acknowledged a truth we still grapple with. Some messages aren't meant to outlive their moment. Today, thousands of these bowls sit in museum cases, their curses neutered by display lights. But their legacy lingers in the unspoken pact between writing and oblivion. They remind us that words can be weapons, yes, but also cages. And sometimes the most powerful act isn't preserving language, but knowing precisely when to let it go. The Ogham stones stand like silent sentinels across Ireland's rugged landscapes, their edges etched with cryptic lines that seem to tally some ancient, forgotten score. These vertical slashes, cutting like knife strokes into the stone, aren't random vandalism, they're a language stripped to its bare bones. Ogham script reduces words to geometry, each cluster of notches representing a letter, each stone a frozen whisper from a world where writing was dangerous. What makes Ogham so haunting isn't just its simplicity, it's its audacity. Unlike the grand inscriptions of Rome or Egypt, these markings don't celebrate emperors or gods. They're stark, functional, almost secretive. Most stones bear only names maglacunas, vote corrigas, as if their creators were tagging territory or memorializing the dead without drawing attention. But attention from whom? Many scholars point to the Roman occupation of Britain. Just across the Irish Sea, the empire was methodically dismantling Druidic traditions, burning sacred groves and outlawing rituals. In that climate, Ogham might have been more than writing. It could have been camouflage. Imagine a Druid priest knowing his oral teachings were too risky to speak aloud, carving knowledge into stone in a code only initiates could read. The very medium was a defense. Ogham's vertical lines blend into the natural fissures of standing stones, making them easy to miss unless you knew where to look. Some inscriptions even run along the edge of the stone, forcing the reader to circle it like a participant in some silent ritual. This wasn't just communication, it was concealment in plain sight. Yet Ogham's mystery deepens with its scarcity. Of the 400 surviving stones, most cluster in Ireland's southwest, with a handful scattered in Wales and Scotland. Their messages are brief, never evolving into literature or law. Was this intentional? Unlike the Maya or Egyptians who layered their glyphs with meaning, Ogham's creators seemed content to let their script remain sparse, as if words themselves were a liability. Even the stone's placement feels deliberate. Many mark boundaries or burial sites, anchoring memory to land without elaboration. The script's decline is just as enigmatic. By the 6th century, as Christianity spread across Ireland, Ogham faded, replaced by Latin alphabets on towering Celtic crosses. But here's the twist. Medieval scholars preserved Ogham's key in cryptic manuscripts like the Book of Balamote, as if they couldn't bear to let it vanish entirely. Today, linguists debate whether Ogham was ever meant to be more than a cipher, a fleeting tool for a fleeting time. Its power wasn't in endurance but in restraint. The stones don't shout, they wait, knowing some secrets are safer when they're almost but not quite forgotten. The Siberian petroglyphs don't just decorate the rocks, they haunt them. Carved into the cliffs and boulders of Russia's Arctic north, these enigmatic symbols stretch across the tundra like a frozen conversation. Some depict animals, reindeer, bears, whales, their outlines worn smooth by centuries of wind and ice. Others are abstract, spirals, grids, zigzagging lines that could be tallies, maps, or perhaps something far more profound. Unlike the grand monuments of Egypt or Mesopotamia, these markings weren't meant to dazzle or intimidate. They were meant to endure silently in a land where few would ever see them. What sets these carvings apart isn't just their remoteness, it's their stubborn refusal to conform. Some clusters resemble pictograms, their symbols clustered like primitive sentences. Others sprawl in chaotic bursts, as if the carvers were sketching thoughts rather than recording events. The most tantalizing examples feature repeating sequences, patterns that hint at linguistic structure. Could this be a lost Arctic script, a language of ice and stone? Or something more elusive, a visual dialect, meant to be understood not through translation, but through immersion in the landscape itself. Theories about their purpose spiral like the carving's own curves. Indigenous Nenets and Evenki peoples, whose ancestors likely created the petroglyphs, speak of spirits whispering through the rocks. Some researchers propose the symbols served as navigational aids, marking migratory routes or sacred sites in a terrain without roads or landmarks. Others see ritual significance, a way to commune with the animals depicted, to ensure successful hunts or ward off misfortune. But the most compelling possibility is also the simplest, that the petroglyphs were never meant for outsiders at all. Their isolation suggests a language of intimacy, a dialogue between a people and the land that sustained them. Unlike the Rosetta Stone or the Behistun inscription, these carvings left no bilingual key. Modern attempts to decipher them rely on ethnographic parallels, comparing the symbols to the art and oral traditions of Siberia's surviving indigenous groups. Yet even these connections feel tenuous. The petroglyphs' creators didn't just leave behind a puzzle, they left behind a choice to preserve their words not in libraries or temples, but in the very bones of the earth. Today, climate change threatens to erase these icy archives. As permafrost thaws and erosion accelerates, some carvings are crumbling faster than they can be documented. But perhaps that's the final lesson of the Siberian petroglyphs. They weren't carved for eternity, they were carved for now, a fleeting moment in a vast, indifferent wilderness. Their power lies not in permanence but in their quiet defiance, a reminder that some stories aren't meant to be read. They're meant to be felt, like the cold bite of the wind or the weight of a reindeer's gaze across the snow. The Jiahu symbols don't just whisper from the past, they murmur in a language we've forgotten how to hear. Etched onto tortoise shells and pottery fragments in a Neolithic village along China's Yellow River, these markings date back 9,000 years, predating even the earliest Sumerian cuneiform by millennia. At first glance, they look like simple scratches, crosses, lines, and geometric shapes, but their arrangement is eerily deliberate. Some cluster in sequences that resemble tallies or ownership marks. Others appear isolated, as if they were meant to stand alone, symbols with meanings lost to the mists of time. What makes these fragments so tantalizing isn't just their age, it's the possibility that they represent one of humanity's first experiments with writing, a system that flickered to life and then vanished without a trace. Why would a script so revolutionary simply disappear? The answer might lie in the very nature of the Jiahu culture. Unlike later dynasties that used writing to administer empires, these early farmers lived in small, tightly knit communities. Their symbols might not have been designed for record-keeping or trade, but for something far more intimate: ritual. Imagine shamans carving cryptic signs onto tortoise shells before casting them into fires, seeking omens in the cracks. Or potters marking vessels with symbols meant to ward off evil spirits, their power tied to secrecy rather than communication. This wasn't a writing system meant to evolve, it was a sacred cipher, its potency dependent on remaining just beyond understanding. The Jiahu symbol's fragility adds another layer to the mystery. Unlike clay tablets or stone stelae, tortoise shells and pottery shards are easily broken, buried, or burned. If these markings were part of a spiritual practice, their destruction might have been intentional, a way to release their magic or protect their secrets. Later Chinese cultures, like the Shang with their oracle bones, developed more permanent scripts, but Jiahu's symbols remained frozen in time, a brief spark of creativity that never caught fire. Yet their legacy lingers. Some scholars have drawn faint lines connecting Jiahu's markings to later Chinese characters, suggesting that these early scratches might be the distant ancestors of a writing system that would one day span continents. Others argue that the symbols were a dead end, a local dialect of expression that died with its creators. Either way, they challenge our assumptions about how writing begins. Perhaps not all scripts are meant to grow into literature or law. Some exist only for a moment, like a breath on a cold morning, visible just long enough to remind us that language, in all its forms, is as ephemeral as it is eternal. The race to decipher lost scripts has entered uncharted territory, where archaeologists' trowels meet artificial intelligence's algorithms. Imagine feeding the Voynich manuscript's looping script into a neural network trained on every known language, or mapping the Indus Valley symbols against a database of global glyphs. The promise is seductive, machines spotting patterns invisible to the human eye, cracking codes that resisted centuries of scholarship. Already, breakthroughs tease what's possible. Researchers using our eye have partially decoded Linear B, the ancient Mycenaean script, by identifying linguistic structures buried in its symbols. Similar efforts now target Rongorongo's lunar calendars and the Proto-Elamite ledger markings, treating each stroke as data points in a grand statistical puzzle. But here's the catch: what if these scripts weren't designed to be solved? Some languages thrive on ambiguity. The Tujia shaman's glyphs gain power from their secrecy, while Nsibidi's fluid symbols demand initiation, not translation. I might pass their syntax, but can it grasp the cultural weight behind a symbol meant only for certain eyes? Even technologically, obstacles loom. Machine learning requires vast datasets, yet many lost scripts survive in fragments. The Phaistos Disc's 200 symbols offer scant material for algorithms to chew on. And then there are scripts like the Rohonc Codex, deliberately scrambled with mixed writing directions and borrowed iconography, as if their creators anticipated future decryption attempts and built traps. The ethical quandary runs deeper. When cultures like the Bogomils burned their own texts or the Etched society guarded Nsibidi with oaths, they made a choice. Some knowledge isn't for outsiders. Modern tools could override that intent, digitally reconstructing what people labored to erase. Archaeologists face similar dilemmas when unearthing artifacts like the Siberian petroglyphs, their meanings sacred to indigenous communities who never consented to their display. Does curiosity justify excavation, or does preservation sometimes mean leaving stones unturned? Yet hope persists in unexpected places. Collaborative projects like the Cherokee Nation's partnership with linguists to revitalize Sequoia's Syllabary show how technology can honor, not exploit, cultural legacy. Meanwhile, new discoveries rewrite the rules. In 2021, scans of charred Roman scrolls from Herculaneum, once considered unreadable, revealed hidden text through advanced imaging. Perhaps the next breakthrough lies in a tomb not yet excavated, a tablet still buried, waiting to whisper its secrets on its own terms. The future of lost scripts may hinge on balance, leveraging our eyes' brilliance while respecting silence as a form of speech. After all, some doors stay locked not because we lack the key, but because knocking was never an option. The real question isn't whether we can decode these languages. It's whether we should, and that's a riddle no algorithm can solve. These 24 scripts are more than just unsolved puzzles. They are acts of defiance, deliberate choices to step into the shadows rather than be remembered on someone else's terms. Think about it, from the knotted threads of the Inca's Quipu to the spiraling secrets of the Phaistos Disc, these civilizations didn't just fade away. They took control of their own vanishing, leaving behind symbols that tease us with their silence. It's as if they whispered, "You can dig up our ruins, but you'll never truly know us." Consider the sheer audacity of that decision. In a world where empires built monuments to ensure their legacies would outlast them, these cultures did the opposite. The Bogomils burned their sacred texts rather than let them be twisted into heresy. The Tujia shamans encoded their knowledge in glyphs designed to deceive outsiders. Even the creators of the Voinish manuscript, whether alchemists, hoaxers, or something stranger, crafted a book that refuses to yield its secrets, no matter how many algorithms we throw at it. This wasn't carelessness, it was a calculated act of resistance, a way to say, some truths aren't yours to possess, and that's what makes these scripts so haunting. They force us to confront an uncomfortable question. Is forgetting just as powerful as remembering? For the Cathars, erasure was survival. For the Bamum scribes, it was tragedy. But for others, like the Jiahu symbols creators, silence might have been sacred, a way to keep their rituals potent by keeping them hidden. In a world obsessed with documentation, where every thought is archived and every moment shared, these scripts remind us that some stories lose their magic when spoken aloud. So the next time you stumble upon an undeciphered script, don't just see a mystery, see a choice. These civilizations didn't disappear by accident, they left clues meant to be pondered, not solved. And in that way, they've outsmarted history itself, because the greatest trick isn't being remembered, it's making sure you're remembered on your own terms. If that idea sends a shiver down your spine, you're not alone. Drop a comment below with which script fascinates you most. Is it the Cherokee Syllabary's Defiance, the Ogham stone's secrecy, or something even stranger? And if you're hungry for more stories where the past refuses to play by the rules, hit that subscribe button. The shadows are deeper than they seem, and the best mysteries are still waiting.